you a family caregiver? Are you caregiving for someone who can no longer take care of themselves? Are you overwhelmed? This is Caregiver Solutions Info with Marcia Teele. Marcia will be hosting an hour of true stories and information, tips and updates of the latest research and necessary information in the caregiving field, focusing on you, the family caregiver. An Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert, Marcia has 15 years of hands-on experience at Arden Courts, a leader in assisted living dementia communities here in the U.S. Marcia covers everything you need to know as a family caregiver, especially if you care for a loved one with Alzheimer's disease or other related dementia or chronic illness. If you have a friend or relative that is also a family caregiver, call them now. They won't want to miss a minute. And let them know they can watch on caregiversolutions.info. And they can listen on WNN 1470 AM in South Florida or nationally on the iHeartRadio app. Now, sit back, relax, and learn from our host, Marcia Teele, as she brings information to you that may just be the caregiving solution you need.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Caregiving Solutions Info. I'm so glad you could join us today, whether you're listening on the local radio station or joining us on caregiversolutions.info website. However you're here, I'm glad that you are. This show is for you, the family caregiver. We ask the questions and you get the answers. We have guests that come on to the show that are experts in their field from all different areas of healthcare, and we ask them those tough questions, the questions that you would ask if you had access to all of these healthcare professionals. And so today we have another great show coming up for you. We are live from Boca Raton, Florida. Now, if you have a question, if you hear something on this program that you want to ask more about, if you have a comment, or if you'd like us to discuss something that's particularly of interest to you, you can send me an email. That email address is delray@arden-courts.com. Again, Delray, DELRAY, at arden-courts.com. So last week on this show, we had a guest and we discussed special interior designs in the home to help people that have dementia to live more independently and safely. And we talked about different ideas that you could incorporate into your home, such as lighting and furniture design and colors, so that a person with dementia could feel more comfortable, be safer, and be more independent. So I received a question from Kim in Coral Springs. And Kim writes to us and says, to what degree does depth perception affect a person with Alzheimer's disease? Well, that's a great question, Kim, and thank you for following up and asking that question based on last week's show. I'd like to answer that question by first explaining what depth perception is. The definition of depth perception is the visual ability to perceive the world in 3 dimensions and the distance of an object. And so in order to do that, you must have something called stereopsis, and you have to do the stereopsis, meaning that it's a way that's going to accurately affect the way the brain tells the eyes what it sees. So in other words, you have to have 2 good eyes and see clearly, and then the brain has to process that information and put out that information of what the eyes are seeing. So it's a combination of the eyes working with the brain. So depth perception is the ability to see in a 3-dimensional world, and also to measure distance of an object. So that being said, as we get older, our vision can be impaired, sometimes by cataracts, sometimes by macular degeneration, sometimes the lenses of our eyes get yellow or they get blurry, and that's sometimes a normal aging process. But if someone has Alzheimer's disease, then this is compounded because somebody with Alzheimer's disease can actually lose their depth perception. They have a hard time determining how far something is, what the distance is. Sometimes because of that, they can actually run into walls because they can't judge that. So if you've ever heard of someone with dementia running into walls, it might be because they have a lack of depth perception. You might also have noticed, if you've been around someone with dementia long enough, that if there were a tablecloth, for instance, on the table, and it was floral and had lots of flowers and leaves, a person with Alzheimer's or dementia might start picking at that tablecloth as if they were picking the leaves or the flowers off the tablecloth. And probably one of the reasons for doing that is because they're not able to distinguish that is a flat object, and maybe they're seeing it as flowers and leaves actually lying on the table. So this is something that can affect people with dementia, also with their ability to walk and their ability to judge steps, for instance. If you have a carpet that has a border, you go into a lot of hotels and restaurants, and they may have carpet on the floor that has borders. A person with dementia may see that with their lack of depth perception as a step, and they may try to step over that, or they may see it as a step up or a step down. So if they're walking and they see that as a step up or a step down, pretty much they're going to fall because it's not there, and their eyes are playing games with their brain, and they can't distinguish it because of a lack of depth perception. Now, we know also that people with dementia also have a reduced field of vision. They lose a lot of times this peripheral vision here, and their field of vision actually narrows. And again, that affects their depth perception. So they're unable to see side to side, and they, again, bump into things. They're scared because they can't see what's on either side of them like we can. When we look straight ahead, we can see left and right. So the field of vision, depth perception, these all affect people that have dementia, and their environment needs to be changed in order to help them become more safe and independent. Another thing that affects with depth perception is color. Color, contrast, and depth perception really go hand in hand. For instance, someone that has dementia and depth perception disabilities can't distinguish different objects when they're together, even in the same local general area, if they're the same color. They have trouble distinguishing colors if there's not a great color contrast. So take, for instance, a red plate that has red strawberries, and you're serving mom some strawberries on a red plate. She's going to have trouble with depth perception and distinguishing where the strawberries are. So it's very important to realize this. So when you're caring for someone, to realize that they possibly could have narrowing field of vision, they could have depth perception, and they're going to have inabilities of doing certain things that you may expect them to do. So how can you help your loved one who suffers with depth perception problems? Number one, you want to make sure you have better lighting. It doesn't have to be harsh lighting. That's actually not a good thing for someone with dementia to have really harsh lighting, but you want to have some good lighting. And natural lighting is the best, but obviously at night you can't have natural light from the sunshine. So you want to have some adequate lighting for them. That's very important. You want to use muted colors or have a single color to eliminate problems of the carpeting and the borders, just like we talked about. Floral patterns in general seem to pose a higher degree of confusion for people that have depth perception than do geometric patterns. So if you have a choice between a floral tablecloth and a checkered tablecloth, or something maybe that has more geometric, or even a solid one, choose that over the floral because it will be less confusing for that person that has dementia and depth perception problems. Also, we talked last week about eliminating floor clutter. You want to make sure that their path is clear so that because of the depth perception, they don't have to figure out how to wander around clutter on the floor. And use that color contrast. So that is very helpful in maintaining a person's ability to function by having color contrast. What do I mean by that? In addition to changing out the plate, so you may have a red plate, but maybe put the white food on the red plate. A lot of the American diet is consisted of a lot of white food. We have white potatoes and white rice and white chicken and white fish. And if you put that on a white plate, the food will actually disappear to a person that has low vision, depth perception problems, and dementia. So if you want someone to be able to be more independent and to know where their food is on their plate and be able to enjoy their meal, then put that white food on a different color plate. It doesn't have to be red, although red does stimulate appetite. That's the color that is engaging and helps us to stimulate our appetite. But if it's a darker plate with white food or vice versa, that's going to help them a lot, okay? So that's very important. Also, in the bathroom, one of the ways you can use color contrast is by painting the walls of the bathroom a dark color so that the toilet and the sink, which usually is white, is going to pop. And a person that has vision problems will be able to see that toilet or sink a lot better if the walls are dark and it stands out. Or one of the things that we do at Art and Quartz is that we use colored toilet seats on top of the white toilet so that you have a colored seat that actually is distinguishing the top of the toilet from the bottom. And again, that's a color contrast, and it helps also with their depth perception. So these are things you can do at home, and I thank Kim from Coral Springs for asking that question as a follow-up to the show. It's very important, and we always can learn more. So thank you, Kim, for that. When we come back, we're going to be talking about something that's really important when it comes to helping people with disabilities as we age, and I can't wait to share that with you. So stay tuned. We'll be right back after this first commercial break.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides. Make First Choice your first choice for home health care. First Choice is state certified for Medicare-covered services such as medical treatment and rehabilitation. Qualified healthcare professionals come to your home and work closely with your doctor to build a care plan designed to get you back on your feet as soon as possible. Founded and operated by registered nurses, First Choice Home Health is dedicated to providing exceptional home health care. Their highly skilled medical professionals have the knowledge and ability to provide patients quality care. Call First Choice Home Health at 561-296-2770. That's 561-296-2770. And tell them you want them as your first choice. You are listening to your host, Marcia Teele, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on CareGiverSolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
And we're back with Caregiver Solutions Info. Today's topic is about support for vulnerable individuals who need help with life management due to age, disability, or family circumstances. And here to talk about that is Nivit Lee, who is the founder and CEO of Monarch Care, which is a nonprofit social service agency. Welcome, Nivit.
Thank you, Marcia. I'm glad to be here.
I'm glad that you are here because I took that right off your website. All right, we're going to talk about vulnerable individuals who need help with life management due to age, disability, or family circumstances. That's a lot.
It is. And frankly, it took us a long time to come up with that mission statement because Monarch Care over the years has served more and more people, and we don't ever want to exclude anybody. So we originally started off, we started off as the Elder Care Connection. And then we began to serve more people that were under the age of 60, 65, and they were a little perturbed that they were being served by an agency with that name. So they
don't want to be considered elders.
Hey, listen, my dad's 80 and he doesn't want to be considered elder either. So I understand.
And why the name Monarch Care? How did you come up with that, and why? Does it have a significance?
It does. We have had the pleasure of really making a huge difference in people's lives, and we like the idea of the butterfly going through the metamorphosis, and so our tagline is transforming lives.
Well, you know what I like? I love butterflies anyway, and when you had that name change, I pictured a cocoon, and I pictured the butterfly, because that's your symbol, in the cocoon, because you kind of cover that vulnerable object that, while they're still growing and needing help and needing protection until, it's free to do its own thing. And I thought that was very symbolic, and I really like it.
It is true. We do wrap our arms around our clients, whether they be younger individuals until they bloom, as you say. And sometimes, when you're dealing with dementia, it's more like a return to the womb. And so then we do wrap our arms around more closely to make sure that they're safe.
And also, if you go a little further, even when the butterfly comes out of the cocoon and the butterfly is free to fly, the butterfly is very fragile because those wings are very thin and fragile. And even if a butterfly blooms, a lot of times that butterfly still has to be protected and still needs that protection that you give to your clients, even though when you get them on their way, they need to check in once in a while, make sure their wings haven't been broken, make sure that they're still able to be as independent as possible. So first of all, I want to thank you very much for what you and your organization does. And I want to get into about what a social service agency like Monarch Care can provide. So we're going to talk about care management, we're going to talk about guardianship, we're going to talk about money management, because those are probably the three largest areas that you actually provide services
Correct.
for. All right? So these are not just for the elderly, as you said. People have disabilities, physical, mental
illness. We also have individuals who have developmental disability. That's a big thing now. It used to be when I was growing up, people would, parents would raise their child with a developmental disability, and the child will only live to be maybe my age. That's not the case any longer. And so there are a lot of individuals out there whose parents are not going to outlive them. And there is a concern about what happens to those people. So.
Right. That is a big concern is, we're living longer. Even people with disabilities are living longer just because of the age of medicine and what we can do to, have longevity in our lives. And sometimes it's a good thing and sometimes it's not, because it can present problems as we age.
That's true. That's true. Aging is definitely impounded when you're dealing with somebody that has a disability on top of it. In fact, you and I were talking before about if you maybe have a propensity towards dementia and then you go under anesthesia. We have one client right now who, it turns out, she was perfectly fine. She went in to have her hip surgery, and she came out with a severe memory loss. And she has a son with a developmental disability. So in this case, Monarch Care wrapped our arms around both the mom and the son, trying to keep that family together.
Well, that's why we want to talk about things like this, because, there's a lot of adult children that watch this program, and a lot of spouses, and people are concerned of what's going to happen to them, when they age, if something does happen to them. And who would have thought, as this woman going to have hip surgery, that she was perfectly fine mentally, and because of the anesthesia, and for all of you out there that haven't heard this before, anesthesia, especially in older adults, can tend to exacerbate dementia if you have a propensity to have dementia in the first place. So we see this more common than not, because a lot of people are actually putting surgeries and things off because they're actually afraid of this. And it is a scary thing, but you have to be aware of it, that is a possibility. And in this lady's case, as you said, she has a son who's disabled who can't step up to the plate to take care of her because he needs care too.
Right.
So this is a perfect example why care management is important, why we need to know about it. So let's talk about care management. When does somebody need it? It was a good example in this case, but that was something that wasn't planned. And I'm a big advocate of telling people, plan ahead. Don't wait for a crisis to happen. Get your ducks in a row. Find out the information. If you have a plan, you're going to be on a better path than if you just wait until the pieces fall apart. So in this lady's case, obviously she couldn't plan for that, in that particular circumstance. But she could have planned before her surgery for her son to have maybe what he needed in the event that she predeceased him. Right. So let's talk about care management, when somebody would need it, when's a good time, and give us some examples of why somebody should consider care management.
So, first of all, let's define care management. Okay. Because over the years, certainly it's changed. The way that at Monarch Care, the way that we provide care management is we take a look at the situation as it stands. And very often, the first time that we consider what the situation is by a phone call by a family member. We'll go out and we will do an assessment of the individual. And then it's really taking one step at a time. We'll identify whatever the needs are. And it may be as minor as simply you were talking earlier before, Marcia, about cleaning up the house so that it's easier to get around. So maybe an environmental assessment to take up all the scatter rugs, move all the electrical cords, all that sort of thing. But additionally, you also want to look at, is this person safe living in the home? Most of the people that call us are family that are not here, so they are long-distance caregivers. And that's very different than if you're living at home with a spouse or a brother, sister,
Absolutely.
aunt, or uncle.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we end up becoming is the eyes and ears for what is going on in the home.
And it doesn't have to be somebody that has dementia for you to be the eyes and ears, because, a lot of times the adult children who are living out of state, they don't even realize sometimes that their mother or dad has memory loss because they're talking to them on the phone. They don't get to visit that often. They say, gee, everything's fine. And they ask the questions that they think as an adult child they should ask, how are things going? Did you go to the doctor? What did he say? And their parent could actually have memory loss, not know the answers to these things because they've forgotten what the doctor said. They have forgotten about what new medication they're supposed to be getting, but they're making up the stories to please the son or to make it seem like they know what's going on. That's called covering up, and it can lead to disaster. So, someone who has dementia, that's one thing, but an older adult living, especially alone, could definitely benefit from care management when the family's not around.
Absolutely. As we age, it just gets more difficult to do things. I myself am having more of a challenge getting out of the car because I injured my back. So it slows things down, and the older that we get, the slower things go, and it's more of a challenge. I know with my father, who I said, he's 82, my mom is about to be 80, and he has a hard time getting all the things that he wants to do into his day because everything else takes a little bit longer. So it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody needs to have dementia, but I do think that anybody that's living at home alone and is a senior would benefit, if nothing else, just by a care manager going out and doing an assessment. We have had family members that have come out and have asked us to come out and do an assessment and then write up a plan of care with recommendations, and then they take those recommendations and they implement it themselves, whether they're local or distant. It's also getting that written plan of care is really key, especially if it's a family that's got a lot of siblings. It was once upon a time we used to have to be on the phone with 4 different siblings. Now email is so much more wonderful because everybody hears the same information. We're all on the same page.
Well, it makes sense to deal with one particular person, or else, like in this case with email, to share it all at once, because you can't be talking to all the different siblings and, they all don't have the same information at the same time, and then you're repeating yourself all the time.
That's true.
And it does get confusing, so I think that's a great idea. But with care management, so you make a plan of care, then let's say for an elderly parent, so an adult child could follow that plan of care. So that's great, and they've got their plan and they're implementing it. But maybe they need more boots on the ground. Maybe they can't implement it themselves. Maybe mom or dad is not compliant with what the adult child is trying to do. So in that case, would you then actually go in more often and be more present in the life of that elderly person?
Yes. So we'll always start with that initial assessment with the plan of care, but then depending on what the plan of care is, it may mean that the individual needs a companion in the home a couple times a week to take them shopping, make sure that meals are prepared. It can expand out. That companion can be in there 5 days a week. At this point, we are talking about a vulnerable individual. This is a person who has now become dependent on somebody, and there is a concern to make sure that there's safe and secure services going on in the home. So care manager would be out there visiting, making sure, asking, holding that companion accountable. And then the next step would, stepping out of the whole care management, one of the things that Monarch Care does as well is provide daily money management.
Well, I have a question, because you keep saying an individual, but I have in my mind a picture of an elderly couple, maybe, in their late 80s, early 90s, and they're living together, and maybe you've come across this, but they're both vulnerable.
Yes.
So now you're in the home and they're living with somebody, but they're really not able to take care of each other. So have you had cases where you have 2 people that in the home that you're actually care managing for both of them?
Yes, and most of the time in that situation, what you've got is those 2 people together don't add up to 2 people, they add up maybe to 1.5. So you've got one that is physically disabled, the other one may be very functional physically, but has memory loss or lack of judgment. And so in this case, it can be a perfect, they're working together and they're accomplishing what they need to accomplish, perhaps with a little bit of assistance and some direction. But sometimes it can be a real mix for disaster.
So with care management, let's take this couple, for instance. So some of the components of care management not only would be safety in the home, but it would include things like making sure they're taking their medicine.
That's a big piece.
Making sure that they have food in the house.
Absolutely.
Making sure that it's good
and
and
the right
fresh.
food, yes.
Yeah.
Not salty soup when you're on high blood pressure medication. Another time that a care manager can really make a huge difference is if, let's continue with the scenario of the couple, okay, and one goes into the hospital and then comes out. We have found that it's almost 100% of the time, person goes into the hospital, they're on a list of medications, let's say 6 medications. They come out of the hospital, they're on only 4 of the 6 medications, and 2 of the 4 are named something different because it's in generic instead of the...
very confusing.
And so what we call that is medication reconciliation. So we want to make sure that that individual is on the right medication.
That is confusing.
Sure.
Especially with all these generic names. And I can see why it's easy for someone who has poor eyesight, like we talked about before, with the vision problems, who's older, maybe has some mild cognitive impairment, if not full-blown dementia, and they're trying to juggle the new medications and the bottles. And, we hear stories all the time of people that have been undertaking the meds, overtaking their meds, or not taking their meds, and it causes a lot of problems that, don't necessarily have to happen if someone would have thought about this, again, a plan, and had the forethought to involve someone who could help them.
And this is part of when we do that initial assessment, we will have a list of all the medications, all the doctors. Sometimes we're just on call. Family brings us in, asks us to do the initial assessment, and then, okay, if mom or dad goes into the hospital, can we call you? Of course. And then at this
sort
point...
of like on retainer?
Absolutely.
Oh, good, okay.
and so therefore, when the person goes into the hospital, we now have the list of the medications. We can call, we can go down to the hospital, we can sit with that person, make sure that they're getting the proper care, that everybody at the hospital understands this person does have mild cognitive impairment, and to make sure that we explain really what the true situation is, because a lot of seniors do not want to admit that they are not fully functional. And it's very hard to say, no, I do have an incontinence issue, or sometimes I do forget to take my medication.
Right. It's embarrassing, and sometimes they're even in denial. So, you have those issues, those barriers, and it's hard, but you all have been trained to break down those barriers.
Right. And we try and act as the mediator there as well. And it's interesting. I mentioned that my mom has dementia. My dad is a caregiver. They live on the other side of Florida. And it doesn't matter that I've been doing this for 25 or 30 years. Does my dad listen to me? Oh, no.
No, because you're the daughter. What do you know? You're the daughter. And that's so common, even though you're the professional and you have the knowledge, experience, and, and all of that, you're still the daughter. So you're in that daughter role.
When we're contacted by family members, very often we're contacted by the son who's a doctor, or the daughter who's a nurse, or the niece who's a lawyer. And it doesn't matter. They're just family. They don't know anything. And then I go in, and mom or the aunt says, oh, well, Nivit said I need to do this, so I better do it.
Well, that's very common, and I think that not only do they see their child as still in the child role, even though they're an adult, a lot of times the parent may not want to tell their child everything. They just don't want to divulge everything that's going on. So they'd rather do it to a paid professional and keep their secrets, or, keep it more professional than, and sometimes causing a lot of family drama.
Well, in particular, if you have long distance family, then it's a challenge, because as you said, they'll call every Sunday morning and mom says, yes, everything's fine, of course, yes, I did this, I did that, of course there's food, oh, no problems. And then I go in and see what the real story is.
Yeah, it is pretty sad sometimes, I'm sure. So when we come back from our commercial break, we're going to talk to Nivit about personal money management and how she can help with that. We'll be right back.
Do you need the advice of an elder law attorney, but perhaps find it difficult or overwhelming getting to appointments? The solution is the Elder Law Department. They bring elder law to you by meeting with you in the comfort of your own surroundings to discuss your personal situation and family needs. In practice since 1994, Heidi Friedman is a member of the Elder Law section of the Florida Bar. She and her team help families with issues that include incapacity and estate planning, asset preservation, veterans benefits, and other legal issues that seniors may face. Call the Elder Law Department at 954-383-1143. 954-383-1143. They bring elder law to you. Make First Choice your first choice for home health care. First Choice is state certified for Medicare covered services such as medical treatment and rehabilitation. Qualified healthcare professionals come to your home and work closely with your doctor to build a care plan designed to get you back on your feet as soon as possible. Founded and operated by registered nurses, First Choice Home Health is dedicated to providing exceptional home health care. Their highly skilled medical professionals have the knowledge and ability to provide patients quality care. Call First Choice Home Health at 561-296-2770. That's 561-296-2770. And tell them you want them as your first choice. You are listening to your host, Marcia Teele, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on CareGiverSolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
And we're talking with Nivet Lee, founder and CEO of Monarch Care, which is a social service agency. And we're talking about services that can be implemented with vulnerable people, especially people that have dementia. So Nivet, we want to talk about personal money management and how that's important and what you can do when you find that a person who has always been great about managing their affairs, especially people that have been high-powered professionals, even in the financial realm, being presidents of banks, for instance, or CPAs, and all of a sudden they're making poor choices, they're giving away their money, they're writing multiple checks to the same company for the same bills, and this can be a problem because the dementia, is not always evident until things like this start happening. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, I will say that, frankly, in all my years of experience, you see it in the finances before you see it anywhere else. And that's because my thought, and this is just my personal opinion, is that dementia is sort of the reverse of aging. And so the last thing that you forget are some of the first things that you learn. Manners is one of them. You learn manners before you're 3, and manners still stick around, whereas some of us don't learn how to balance a checkbook ever or until we're well into our 20s or 30s.
Right.
So certainly managing money is a challenge. And we have a couple of clients right now that are great examples of how we've been able to help them. One is Rose, and she has mild cognitive impairment, probably into first stages of dementia. She lives at home alone. She has a part-time caregiver. Her nephew has power of attorney. He lives up in New York. He's a busy man. He's a high executive in, I believe, the New York City school system. And he doesn't want to take away Rose's independence, but at the same time, he's very concerned because she is a vulnerable individual.
She is vulnerable.
Yes.
You see it all the time. You see the elderly going into banks and they're withdrawing money, and sometimes they're by themselves, and sometimes they're with an aide, and sometimes, depending upon who that aide is, they many times can take advantage of that person, especially in a bank situation.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. And it's a challenge because Rose doesn't have a lot of money, but she has money, and the aide is probably just barely scraping by. So
temptation.
There's a lot of temptation there. In this particular case, we started going out there twice a month and basically went through all the bills, all the papers with Rose, And she agreed what needed to be paid, and then we would go back to our office and we do it online banking. This is great now, Marcia. Used to be we'd have to go out there, we'd have to write a check. Now we can come back, do online banking, show it to the nephew who has the power of attorney, and it actually turned out to be a very nice situation. So Rose still feels very empowered. She's in charge, but she's got a little bit of help, and it's being overseen by a family member who she trusts. And this is a great opportunity to be able to keep somebody, that whole use it or lose it.
Right.
Yeah, keeping her using it to
so
some
she's
degree.
still involved. You're telling her what's going on, and you have her input.
Right.
But now change is good, because with the change with technology, you're able to do this more efficiently, share the information with the nephew who's the power of attorney, and all is good.
Correct.
And everybody's happy.
Except in that particular case, it turned out that there was a little bit of exploitation by a previous caregiver, which we uncovered. But now that's not the case. Because
that was before you stepped in.
Right.
And now, you've eliminated that problem. But again, that is a problem. So for you out there that know vulnerable adults, then they are having trouble with finances, and you can, like Nevit said, you see that first sometimes, that should be a red flag.
Absolutely.
Absolutely a red flag to do something. And what about your other example?
So I actually have two more. So segueing into, we were talking about a couple, and we had a couple, husband and wife, and the wife had been the one who had always paid the bills. And now the wife had dementia. And the husband didn't know really how to pay bills. He just had never navigated it. They had always kept their money separate. She had more than he did. So he was really at his wit's end, not quite sure what to do. And in that case, we also brought family in, and this was a estranged family, and we sort of asked the couple if it would be okay if we could reach out to their sons. They had children from different marriages.
That gets complicated.
It can be very complicated. But in this situation, again, we brought family in to supervise what we're doing, and the online banking is really a wonderful thing. So that was really terrific.
Wow, that's great.
My third client is actually featured in our e-letter this month because she just celebrated her 100th birthday.
I saw that.
She has dementia. She still lives at home alone. She has 24-hour caregivers. She has her attorney as her trustee. But she was a high-powered lady. You talk about the high-powered, right? She never married and had always taken care of things. She was a bookkeeper and very self-reliant. And the idea of her needing any assistance at all really did not sit well with her. And it took us a while to be able to develop trust.
After 100 or so years, I would imagine you get pretty independent, yes.
So, but we've been working with Ruth for about five or 6 years now. We started off just helping her make sure that she was paying the right bills. She still signed all the checks, and then we notified her trustee of what had been going on. And then over the years, she really began to decline. And at that point, we suggested, how about if we bring a caregiver in? And now we have a care manager that goes out and visits to make sure that everything's going good with the caregiver. And then he brings all the bills back for our financial specialist to do the bills.
So my question is, you have care managers that are going into people's homes.
Yes.
They're dealing with their finances. You're basically have control of their money, and you're paying their bills. You're all certified, bonded, insured, licensed, all of that, right?
So Monarch Care is a nonprofit agency, and we have whatever insurance and bonding that's available for the services that we provide. But that brings us to our service as legal guardian.
Okay, and before we get into guardianship, we're going to take our last commercial break, and we'll be right back.
Do you need the advice of an elder law attorney, but perhaps find it difficult or overwhelming getting to appointments? The solution is the Elder Law Department. They bring elder law to you by meeting with you in the comfort of your own surroundings to discuss your personal situation and family needs. In practice since 1994, Heidi Friedman is a member of the Elder Law section of the Florida Bar. She and her team help families with issues that include incapacity and estate planning, asset preservation, veterans benefits, and other legal issues that seniors may face. Call the Elder Law Department at 954-383-1143. 954-383-1143. They bring elder law to you. Arden Courts is not just a place to live. It's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides. You are listening to your host, Marcia Teele, an Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert on CareGiverSolutions.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
I'd like to thank our local sponsors and our national sponsor, Arden Courts Memory Care Community, for making this show possible. Arden Courts is a leader in providing care for people with Alzheimer's and other related dementia, and they have over 50 communities across the nation to help you, the family caregiver. And not only do they have these locations, but they are there for you as the family caregiver to provide resources and support groups so that you can not feel that you're in this alone, because you're not. We're there for you. One of the things that Arden Courts would like to provide to you, the family caregiver, is a free copy of this book called The 36-Hour Day. This book is a wonderful resource for caregivers to learn about different kinds of dementia, to learn how to best do caregiving in different situations, lots of tips. You won't want to not have this book in your personal library. So all you have to do to get your own copy is to call the toll-free number of Arden Courts. That number is 888-478-2410. Again, 888-478-2410. Tell them that you heard about this offer on Caregiver Solutions Info, and they'll make sure they get this book right out to you. So we're back with Nivet Lee with Monarch Care, and we're talking about ways to help vulnerable adults, especially those that have dementia. And we want to get into the topic of guardianship real quick before we end our show today, Nivet. And so we talked about care management and all that goes with that, and we talked about personal money management. So tell me about guardianship and how does that differ, and when does somebody need guardianship?
So when you are appointed as legal guardian, very often you end up serving as the care manager and doing personal financial services for an individual. All this show, Marcia, we've been talking about our service doing that when there's family involved. Right. And that's very key, because this is not the kind of thing that you would do if you're dealing with somebody with dementia and go in and start taking care of their bills.
There's always family involved with this.
Absolutely. But in the situation where there isn't family, or family is unable to serve as legal guardian, and the person has not put into place advance directives, which comes back to your comment at the very beginning of the show about planning.
Have a plan.
And having your advance directives, and I'm sure that you've said this many times on this show, but you really need to have a durable power of attorney. You need to have designated somebody as your health care surrogate, and then a living will. But it's the healthcare surrogate piece that's
big
more
three,
important
the
than
three.
the living will.
Right.
And a lot of times we do come across people that don't have that. Or they might have it and they've outlived the person that they designated. I always tell my clients that they want to always go at least one generation below them before they're making their appointments.
Always have an alternative, and,
Yes.
and like I like that too. Not only just an alternate person to be in charge, but I like what you just said. Have it a different generation because then they're
Absolutely.
not going to outlive.
Yeah, you don't. If you're 79, you don't want to appoint your 76-year-old sister. It just doesn't really make a lot of sense.
But
You
then
can.
have your 30-something niece.
That'd be
backup.
2 generations,
Yeah.
but okay.
Yeah, okay.
So in that situation, if you really don't have an alternative and you have an individual that maybe is non-compliant, does not understand that they need help, then you may have to turn to the court system and ask for them to appoint a guardian. Monarch Care is a not-for-profit agency, so it's the agency that gets appointed as a guardian. A lot of times the guardian is an individual. It's, as we said, a family member. And this is where now, as guardian, you take most of the time, if not total control, most control over assets and making healthcare decisions as well as residential decisions. And so this is where you get into placement, trying to decide, is the person still safe in their home? Should we have 24-hour care in the home? Can the person afford 24-hour care in the home?
You make the best decision for that person.
Absolutely.
Barring, all other circumstances.
And you have to look at every single piece of it. In fact, I have a call scheduled with my father to do this very thing with my mom tomorrow.
Wow.
Because
I hope he's listening to the show.
they do live at home together, and she is getting worse, and I am concerned it's really affecting his ability to continue to enjoy life. And let me tell you, my dad he enjoys life. But
you could get so bogged down with this
You
and
can.
and let somebody else take the reins. But something that you said a second ago about have someone needing a guardian is, even if there is family and they're not able to step in as
Yes.
a guardian, sometimes they're unwilling to step in as guardian. They don't really, maybe it's a distant relative and they don't know that person. They really don't want to get involved, and that happens too.
Well, and being the guardian means that you're basically on call 24/7 if something happens, and you're responsible for that individual.
That's right.
Very often we have family members that say, I just want to be the daughter. I don't want to be the bad guy that tells mom that she has to move. And we very often have stepped in to be the bad guy.
Right.
Although we try and do a good cop, bad cop. Maybe I'm the bad cop, but the care manager who's visiting is the good cop. And I have a couple of clients that are in sort of a similar situation right now. I have a father. He's a doctor, and he became appointed as his daughter's guardian. His daughter has mental illness. And he said, I just don't want to deal with this. I just want to be her dad. I don't want to have to do all of this stuff. I don't want to have to file reports to the court. And
Very cumbersome
It is.
for a lay person because there's a
Absolutely.
lot of responsibility, a lot of rules and regulations
Rules.
that go with being a guardian, and I can understand a family member not wanting to deal with that.
And, we've had a lot of bad press, both nationally, on a state, and even on a local basis, about guardianship and people being forced into guardianship, or maybe not the right person being appointed as the legal guardian. And so because of that, the laws have tightened up even more so.
Wow. It's so important. So, care management, money management, guardian, these are all things we all need to be talking about in our family, just as Niv is going to be talking to her family about implementing these wonderful services, for the future. So, Niv, if someone that's listening to us, watching you today, has other questions, maybe wants to contact you and ask you some questions or see if your services at Monarch Care is something that they should be using, can they call you?
Absolutely.
And how do they do that?
So our number is 954-720-2485. or you can send me an email. If you send an email to info@monarchcare.org, then even if I'm out, which I'll be away on vacation shortly, so you don't want to have to wait 2 weeks, somebody else will go ahead and get right back to you. We also have a website that you can go to, monarchcare.org, and there's a lot of information there as well.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being here. It was awesome. I want to thank you, the audience, for joining us today for this wonderful program. I want to encourage you to call Arden Courts, the toll-free number for your free book. And I also want to remind you, until next time, give someone a hug because they need it and so do you. Take care and we'll see you then.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Solutions with Marcia Teele. Join us next week as Marcia, who has 15 years of Alzheimer's disease and dementia care experience, brings you more needed information to help with the care of your loved one. This show can be seen again on caregiversolutions.info, and questions can be left on the site, which may be used on the program to help others. See you next week for more Caregiver Solutions. The opinions expressed on the preceding sponsored program were strictly